Hi. I told myself that I wouldn't get worked up about the case involving Freddy Rivero, the elderly Bolivian man who was attacked by three teenage girls in London, resulting in his death. But the human side kicked in. I thought about it. I just thought how repulsive it was, how disgusting that these evil thugs got just a couple of years each. Um, Judge Judy Kahn, who sentenced them, said that it was a callous attack on a vulnerable old man. This is something I don't get about judges. They kind of state the obvious, and yet they use their power to give said killers a tap on the wrist. And Judge Judy Kahn KC blocked permission for these killers to be named. There are some circumstances where teenage killers are named, but it's rare. So Judge Judy Kahn, you're a disgrace. Like a lot of your profession, in my opinion, because in my view, you endanger the public by giving leniency to dangerous killers, and you show arrogance to the public with your tone deaf sentencing. It's just not good enough. I'm going to go through six things which I feel our justice system could do to improve, because it's all very well criticising it, but you have to come up with alternatives. You have to come up with answers. I don't believe in just criticising and not offering alternatives. So this is some of my suggestions. Of course, there will be more things. This isn't exhaustive. There will be more things that could be introduced. Has anything improved in recent years? Barely anything. Barely anything. Overall sentencing is ever so slightly tougher, ever so slightly, but it's so tiny that it barely makes a difference. Certainly not to the public perception. Under Dominic Raab, who I think was one of our better Justice Secretaries in recent years, victims did have more set parole hearings. I welcome that. And verdicts are televised, but that's just the verdicts, that isn't the trial. And I'm not, by the way, saying the whole trial should be televised. I wouldn't necessarily want an American style, media circus around it. I see the problem with that. It can jeopardise a trial, so I'm not naive. But one thing I definitely believe is urgently needed in our justice system is more accountability of the powers that be. And they could be broken down into three areas: legislators, the sentencing council, and judges. Because those are the three groups that basically determine justice. Legislators make laws, and they determine the minimum and maximum tariffs. The sentencing council then works within that to offer guidelines to judges, and the judges pass the sentences. Judges work with aggravating and mitigating factors. But I am convinced that too many judges in this country are ideologically soft, and I don't think they really grasp the depth of public opinion, or if they do, they simply don't care. I cited the case recently in Merseyside of a teenager who brought a machete to a public area. Thankfully, he didn't use it, but you don't bring a machete to a public area without malicious intent. Anyway, the judge described him as arrogant. And, when I was reading the report at the time, a lot of people thought, okay, this judge is going to pass a tough sentence. He gave him a suspended sentence. A suspended sentence. I think I mentioned 6 points actually. That's just given me a seventh, quite frankly. Just writing notes here. I'm not naive. These things aren't going to change overnight, but first thing on my list, I would say judges need to be far more accountable to the public. Now, I don't think we're going to have a situation where all judges are elected, and I'm not even sure I necessarily advocate that, but I am convinced that judges need to face more public scrutiny. As it stands, people who attend a trial, that is, victims' relatives, the defendants' relatives, journalists, they will see the proceedings. The jury, they'll see the proceedings. But the wider public really have no way of holding a soft judge to account. And I'm not talking here about mob justice, I'm talking simply about democracy. If MPs can be voted out of office, why shouldn't a consistently soft judge be held to account? Why shouldn't they have to answer for their decisions? I don't think they face anywhere near enough public pressure. Now, they might argue they face case backloads and the bureaucracy of the system puts pressure on them, but I don't think they really face enough public scrutiny. I'm convinced of that. Because if they did, maybe they would start to pass sentences that fit more in line with public opinion. And again, I'm not saying that justice should be based on mob rule. It should be based on evidence. It should be based on aggravating factors and mitigating factors. But there is something fundamentally rotten when sentences like the one involving the murder, technically it was manslaughter, I'm calling it murder of Freddie Rivero, when the sentences are so soft, there's something just fundamentally rotten when the judge thinks it's suitable to give those evil teenage girls a couple of years each. That's rotten. They should have got 10 years each, minimum. So I would like to see more accountability of soft judges. What that could take the form of is, in particularly controversial cases, they should be mandated to make some sort of statement explaining their decision. At the moment, like I say, you have televised verdicts and it sort of encompassing that. But I think there should be a way that consistently soft judges, frankly, have their job on the line. Because if they continue to destroy public trust, surely that jeopardises the integrity of the entire judicial system. If they're consistently soft, it damages trust. So, as it stands, the only way a judge can be held to account is if it's professional misconduct. So, for example, they're messing around with a jury member or something like that. But there's really no pressure on them for soft sentencing. I mean, these people seem to be untouchable. They have no social media presence. They have no email address. The postal address is simply the court that they operate in. My point with that is they're in a position of power. They should be open to public scrutiny, peaceful public scrutiny. Okay, and I emphasize peaceful. But I believe that anyone in a position of power, whether it be politicians, executives of companies, judges, police chiefs, anyone in a position of power, media executives, should have to face public scrutiny, really. I am adamant about that. To me, that is one of the core things of democracy. And the reason so many people feel disgusted at our justice system is they don't feel empowered. And part of that is because judges are untouchable. They're distant figures. I tried looking up this judge, Judy Khan. There wasn't even a picture of her. And I want to be very clear on this. I'm not advocating vigilantism. I'm not advocating any sort of violence. I am saying that they should be under scrutiny. When they make soft decisions, they should have to explain themselves publicly. And if they're consistently soft, if they're consistently going on that, I honestly think that they need to be reviewed, for example, into why they're not looking at higher tariffs when the evidence suggests that it should be that way. For example, if defendants have previous records. So I also think the Court of Appeal kind of taps into this thing about accountability. Court of Appeal, as it stands, they largely ignore the public. They're arrogant. They're fundamentally arrogant. Once in a blue moon, they will overturn a sentence for being unduly lenient. But the unduly lenient scheme was brought in because of public anger, and so far, most of the time, it's ignored. The Attorney General will refer that to the Court of Appeal. Most of the time, the Court of Appeal goes along with the original verdict. Sometimes they change it, but that's rare. So, what's the point of it if they're going to just show arrogance? The Court of Appeal needs to face more public pressure, I think. So, accountability, that's the first big point. Tougher minimum tariffs, I think, for some heinous crimes. Now, this is things like, I would say, dangerous driving. Say, for instance, you have someone using drugs or heavily drunk and they're going down the wrong way of a motorway and they kill someone. There should be an absolute minimum tariff for that sort of crime. I'd say 12 years at least, just as an example. So we need to introduce tougher minimum tariffs, because that way judges can't complain that their hands are tied. That way judges have to use those tariffs. As it stands, the minimum tariffs on too many crimes are far, far too lenient. So tougher minimum tariffs. This isn't in any particular order, by the way. Early release, we've seen that with Labour because of the prison overcrowding thing. Now, Shabana Mahmood has said that, as she was Justice Secretary, that would be coupled with strict conditions on the outside. I welcome that, but words are cheap. Words are cheap. So, for instance, if an offender has to be released to ease overcrowding, okay, but make sure their life outside is extremely restricted. Make it very uncomfortable for them. So if they step 1 foot wrong, they'll be brought straight back into prison. Up to now, it hasn't been strict enough. So that's something that can be, and kind of tapped in with this, there's slightly different issues, but community sentencing needs to be much tougher. I would make offenders wear like a jacket of shame, saying, I am a criminal, I am doing community service, something like that. Shame them. We really, really need to get tough, because as it stands, community sentencing is not a deterrent. So it needs to be more, really emphasise that is, if they're going to avoid prison, at least make it very unpleasant. So that sort of outside accountability for offenders, I would say. Now this one's very important, and the campaign group Crush Crime done research, and they pointed out that if you jail repeat offenders, career criminals, it actually has an empirical serious reduction in crime. It's a positive thing. I mean, this isn't rocket science. Something like half of all offences in England and Wales are committed by career criminals. Jail the career criminals and you'll find that crime significantly reduces. It's a no-brainer. And yet we still get, this is again tapping into judges' accountability. You get career criminals appearing before a judge and they get a suspended sentence. Why? I would say if a career criminal, even if it's relatively minor crime, like shoplifting, and that is not minor for the shopkeeper, but if you have a situation like that, it should be mandatory jail. Not second chance after third chance, after fourth chance, after fifth chance. No, not good enough. So jail mandatory, and mandatory jail for repeat offenders. And also I would say unprovoked violence. There should be some levity, some flexibility for cases where someone's defending themselves, i.e. they're attacked and they defend themselves. And definitely there should be protection for homeowners. If, for example, they kill a burglar, they shouldn't spend a day in prison as far as I'm concerned. Or if they're protecting a more vulnerable person. Example, a man sees a girl being raped and he goes and physically tackles the other man and, assaults him. He should be protected by the law, because that's defending another person, or an older person, or someone else more vulnerable. But an unprovoked violent attack should be mandatory jail, not suspended sentence, mandatory jail. The use of suspended sentences is far too frequently applied, and I would say this actually kind of taps into the issue about, I mentioned in the previous video, about manslaughter charges. Far too many cases where we see violent, unprovoked assaults, it's a manslaughter charge. Why not a murder charge? I really strongly believe that if a vulnerable person is attacked and they die, that should be mandatory murder charges. Actually, anyone, but particularly for a vulnerable person, that could be an older person, a homeless person, because they're vulnerable by definition, a disabled person. If they're attacked by some drunk gang and they die or get life-changing injuries, then that should be really seen as an aggravating factor, and it should be a mandatory murder charge. Because you can't tell me that healthy young people attacking a vulnerable old person, they don't expect to do damage. They do, and it should be treated as such. And they can cry all they want about, I didn't mean to kill them. No, I say throw murder charges at them, make them fear the system, because at the moment they don't. And last thing is criminal history should be an aggravating factor. This sort of taps into the thing about career criminals. Too often we see cases where there is a long record of offences, and yet the useless judge presiding still sees fit to give the offender a suspended sentence. Madness. Absolute madness. I could understand maybe a first offence, but when you have a history of criminality, a suspended sentence is nonsensical. It really is. So just in summary, accountability of the justice established, that means individual judges, it means the Court of Appeal. I think the public need to be far, far more empowered. That means holding judges to account. It means putting a hell of a lot more pressure on the Court of Appeal to start listening to the public. I would replace the Sentencing Council, quite frankly, with a body that actually cares about public opinion. They pay lip service, they have consultations, but I don't think they really care, and I don't think they really understand public anger. I don't, despite what they claim. Tougher minimum tariffs. There's a point I've actually missed here. Convicted young offenders should be named. I mentioned this in the last video. If a 16-year-old is deemed mature enough to vote, they should be deemed old enough to be named if they have been convicted of a crime. And I'm talking about conviction, I'm not talking about when they're a defendant, because okay, that could jeopardise the trial, they might be innocent, but if they have been found guilty, name them and shame them. It's disgusting that they're currently protected. If early release is necessary, severe restrictions on that early release, really make their life uncomfortable so that for a given period, so that they think, I don't want to go through this again. Mandatory jail for repeat offenders and cases of unprovoked violence. And I made the caveat outside of cases of self-defence or defending a more vulnerable person. And criminal history should be an aggravating factor. So those are some points. I think I said 6 or 7 at the start. There's probably more than that now. But those are some things I think can improve our criminal justice system. It's not the worst system in the world. There's some parts of the world where criminals really do act with impunity. I mean, look at Haiti, where criminals are literally running the country. It's a hellish situation there. And there's other parts of the world, I think the Nordic states are, if we think sentencing is lenient here, in the Nordic states, they're insanely lenient sentences there. That would never be accepted by the British people. But nevertheless, the British justice system, to many people, it's just infuriating. And the powers that be just seem to live on another planet. I think it's because they've spent so many years at the bar and within legal circles and within the legal clubs and all the rest of it. They genuinely don't grasp public opinion. Or if they do, they just don't do enough to change it, to react to that. They just don't. I probably should be open-minded and say it's not every judge. There are judges who do get this and have their heart in the right place and want to do the right thing. But what I cannot comprehend is judges that state the obvious. They'll say, like, this is a heinous crime, and yet they still protect the criminal by refusing to allow them to be named. Judge Judy Khan, explain yourself. So yeah, those are some things I think can change. I'm not naive. None of this is going to happen overnight. If reform is serious about getting tough on crime, let's see what they're going to do about this. Let's see if they're going to be much tougher on young offenders. Because as it stands, young offenders act with impunity. I think that's rotten. There's other cases. I mean, a drink driver who kills or seriously injures someone, I don't see why they should ever be allowed behind a wheel again. As it stands, they'll go to jail for a while. Then their license is suspended for 8 years or whatever it might be, but not for a lifetime. I don't think if you kill or seriously injure someone, you should ever be allowed behind a wheel again. So that's something that could be brought in. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I don't know how many points that was, but those are some things I think can improve our justice system. What's the most important there? Hard to say. I do think the accountability issue is extremely important because I think the anger the public feels largely comes about from a sense of powerlessness. I mean, if you want to complain about a judge being too lenient, what can you do? You can write to the Attorney General of England, Wales. They then refer it to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal routinely ignores it. So what's the point? What is the point? You can't write to the judge to complain and say, how do you justify this? Because they have no contact address. They're seemingly untouchable. My point would be, if you disagree with what an MP is doing, you can challenge them. You can vote them out of office. You can't do that with judges. And I think we should at least look at, not necessarily electing all judges, but at least making a mechanism whereby they have to explain themselves to the public. Really. Because if they did, maybe they would start to get into the real world a bit more than they are. Honestly, it makes my blood boil, but we'll see. If reform does one good thing, if they are sincere about being the toughest party ever on law and order, and we see significant changes, we see criminals start to fear justice, that's welcome. That's a good thing. Because for too long, especially young offenders, though it can't just be for adult criminals, what would be the point of reform talking tough on crime if young offenders continue acting with impunity? And of course, each case needs to be looked at with its own merit, the specific circumstances and all of that. I do say we shouldn't have justice by mob rule, but I am also saying that our current justice system is deeply undemocratic because it routinely ignores public opinion. That's the truth, and it needs to change.